Welcome everybody to the last episode of Term 3 Lunch Orders on artificial intelligence and the human relationship with technology. I hope you've enjoyed the series so far. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. For Tim and I here at the Wheeler Centre today, that is the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. I would invite you to reflect on the traditional owners of the lands that you are joining us from. I would also like to thank our education partner for this series, VATE, the Victorian Association of the Teaching of English, for creating incredible teaching resources for use with lunch orders materials. You can, of course, go back and download the resources for terms 1 and 2, and the term 3 resources will be available very shortly. I am thrilled today to be joined by Dr. Tim Dean. Tim is the Senior Philosopher at the Ethics Centre, where he holds the Manos Chair in Ethics. He has a doctorate in philosophy from the University of New South Wales on ethics and human nature, and specialises in public philosophy, applied ethics and critical thinking. He is an honorary associate at the University of Sydney and the author of How We Became Human, published by Pan Macmillan. He is also an experienced science writer and editor and has worked for outlets such as The Conversation and edited magazines including Cosmos and Australian Life Scientist. He is the recipient of the Australasian Association of Philosophy Media Professionals Award for his work on philosophy in the public sphere. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
It's a pleasure to be here.
As always, I'm going to hand over to Tim first to deliver his soapbox on today's topic, which is the ethics of artificial intelligence and the ethics of care in that sphere. And then, of course, we'll have a short conversation before leaving all of you with a question to chew on over your lunch break. Over to you, Tim.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I really love the topic for today, this idea of how can we use AI to help us better care for each other? It's a really good angle on this, and it's an angle that really speaks to me. Because we often talk about AI as this really powerful tool to do things, to be more efficient or to produce more wealth or to kind of do things in the world that may or may not be about people. But really, what I think it comes down to, like with any tool, is what does it mean for us? What does it mean for humanity? And so that angle of not how can we use AI to just generate wealth or to make us more productive? How can we use AI to make us care for each other more is a really good way to think about it. And when I think about my first response to that question, my answer immediately goes to this idea that we shouldn't be using AI to replace human relation and to replace human interaction. We need to find ways to use AI to allow for more human interaction and more connection, more sense of belonging and engagement with each other. And I think that's the ultimate goal. And at the Ethics Centre, we think a lot about AI and we think a lot about ethics. We work, for example, with CSIRO and Data61 on the Responsible AI Network, RAIN, along with a bunch of other fantastic partners. And so we're thinking about how can we achieve this? How can we get AI to a point where it enhances our life experience? And the first thing that comes up there is we need to make sure that AI doesn't make things worse. We need to make sure, if we want AI to better help us care for each other, we need to make sure it doesn't harm us. And AI has tremendous potential and huge power to be able to transform human life, but it's also got a lot of potential to cause harm as well. And I think they fall into a few different categories. So one of those categories is that AI has autonomy. And philosophers talk about autonomy and agency in these particular kinds of ways. But what it really means is, unlike other tools like a hammer, which only really does what we want it to do. I mean, a hammer might fall over and break something, but it did that accidentally. It didn't intend to do that. It wasn't acting under its own kind of control or volition. It's us wielding the hammer. But with AI, yeah, we're wielding the AI. We're designing it and we're giving it a task to perform. But then it goes off and does it by itself. it has this idea, or it has this autonomy, this ability to make its own decisions. And that can be really powerful, but it can be really unpredictable as well. And ultimately, AI has the potential to get to what philosophers call agency, like humans, human agency. To be an agent means that you have goals, you've got desires, there are things that you want that inform those goals, and you've got beliefs about what might achieve those goals. Like, if I'm hungry, I desire food, my goal is to have a sandwich, and I believe that all the ingredients in the kitchen, I can direct my own behavior to do that. Now, AI is not quite there. It's not quite making its own goals yet. We're kind of setting the goals for it. But I can imagine a future not that far away where we give AI enough capability to have its own wants and needs and desires and set its own goals and have its own programs, and it could be acting like a completely autonomous agent. And that's very different to a hammer. It's very different to any other tool that we have. So there's an unpredictability built into this. So if we design AI to do all these really amazing, powerful things, and we give it the autonomy to do those things, we don't really know what it's going to be accomplishing. Like, there's this thought experiment that philosophers use, which is the paperclip optimizer. Imagine if we make a machine and we give it all this autonomy and this power, and we just say, look, your goal is to make as many paperclips as possible because we really want paperclips. And the AI runs away and says, okay, how do I make paperclips? And it figures out the best way to extract resources, the best way to make a factory, the best way to pump out paperclips. But then it gets to a point where it's like, I'd like all the metal that you're using to build buildings and cars to make paperclips. And so then it starts to interrupt the activities that we're doing. It starts to impinge upon our goals of doing other things with these resources, and all it's doing is making paperclips. And if we haven't designed a way for the AI to reflect on its behavior or for it to listen to us, if we just set it off in the world running, we might end up with a universe full of paperclips and no people. Now, that is a bit of an extreme example, but you can imagine another kind of poorly optimized autonomous agent that's out there doing things. And then the other danger that we have is people using AI for malicious purposes. They might be spreading misinformation. They might be trying to exploit people. They might be building autonomous weapons where the AI can decide who is it going to target? How is it going to do that? It might say, well, I think there might be some soldiers in that hospital and my priority is to kill the soldiers, so I'm going to attack the hospital. These are real problems. You know, if people are not able to make judgments, if we don't get the ethical programming right in AI, it can directly harm us. These are real threats, but actually I think the biggest threat that worries me in terms of the likelihood is actually an economic threat. This is where AI could be so powerful and so productive and generate so much wealth, but it could take away jobs. And jobs are more than just a thing that we do to earn money. Jobs give us meaning and purpose in our lives. Jobs are workplaces where we connect with other people on a common goal and we share these visions of what we're trying to achieve together. There's a real human element to the work. AI could take that away, it could generate huge amounts of wealth, and it could concentrate that wealth in a small number of hands. And we might end up with a world with vastly more wealth and productivity, but a huge amount of unemployment and poverty because some people are just, or a lot of people are not participating in that AI economy. So we need to get that right. We need to figure out how to design AI so that it is not just optimizing blindly. It's not just running away, following its own goals. We need to give it the right kind of ethical principles. And that's really hard because we can't get humans to agree on a set of ethical principles. How do we get AI to agree? So we need to be really careful about the way that we get AI to work around certain limitations and consider certain kind of principles and rules when it behaves. And then we've got to think about the applications. How do we put it to work and where? And when it makes the world different, how do we distribute the benefits evenly? But I can imagine a world where we get a lot of that stuff right. I can imagine a world where we generate so much more wealth and we reduce insecurity, and it might reduce paid employment, but we also do a lot of work outside of paid employment. People have hobbies and pursuits and projects that are really dear to them. We might be able to free up more time for people to do those things. And in that world, I can imagine that we could create a space where AI genuinely does allow us to care for each other more effectively. It could do it directly. Like we know already that some large language models, things like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, are really good at like relationship counseling or advice or life advice. So if you've got no one else to talk to, or you're worried you've got a problem and you're like, I don't want to be judged by my friends, you can ask questions of the AI and it can give you some reasonably good advice. It's not perfect advice. It's not going to replace people, but it's a good start. And people have found this really useful. They've said, this has helped me. And then it's helped me go and seek the help from people that I need. We've got AI that is helping doctors and lawyers to solve problems, prevent injustices. We've got AI that's working in aged care facilities to make it easier for aged care workers to have that greater human interaction. It's not replacing, it shouldn't be replacing aged care workers, but it's enabling them to have more human interaction. But I think it's the indirect benefits. If we can free us up from toil, from having to work really hard in jobs that we don't enjoy, to be able to pay our way through life, to feed and clothe and give ourselves shelter. If we can find ways to free up time so that people can pursue the projects that are really important to them. Like at the moment in our economy, if you're an artist or a musician, you've got either like a little side hobby or you're a professional. And if you're a professional, you're trying to sell your product. And so you may be compromising the art that you want to create so that you can sell it. Imagine a world where you don't have to make money from your art. You can just make the art that you want to make. You can say, you can write the poetry, you can write the books. You can create the culture and the content that you want to create. I can imagine a world where with greater wealth, if we solve some of the problems of scarcity of goods so that people have enough and we distribute it evenly, with less fear, less scarcity, less uncertainty, less insecurity, there's less conflict. There's less cause for people to be fighting with each other over scarce resources. And I think in that world, we might have more power for ourselves to direct our own lives, and we might have more opportunities to engage with other people. And in that world, with more safety, security, wealth, and time, I think human interaction is going to become an even greater priority. And that's where we can use AI to, a little bit directly, but mostly indirectly, to help us to care for each other more, to make a world where there's more human interaction, not less.
There are many things in there that I would like to pick up on and will attempt to in the next 15 or so minutes. I've got to say, it's nice to be rounding out this discussion with such optimism, because I think that a lot of the representations we see about the human interaction with AI come from places of fear of being taken over, and it's nice to think of a world beyond that, and your view of this world beyond that is incredibly optimistic, which is, I think, a really nice note to be rounding this series out on. One of the things that interests me is that throughout Lunch Orders, we've talked about space, we've talked about the future, we've talked about gardening and food and technology and art, and we've talked about so many topics. And it seems to me that when we're looking to these frontiers of new spaces, one of the things that comes up again and again, whether we're talking about space or the internet or technology or food and the future of food, is the idea of colonisation and who is really in control of things. So given that you are working with a variety of organisations and you're thinking about the people who are embedding ethics into AI, which of course inherently comes from decisions that people are making and therefore arguably their ethics, who are the people who are currently in control of the ethics of AI? Like, what is that landscape?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because if we get AI right, then AI will be in all of our hands, because we'll be in a kind of a post-scarcity society where we all have more wealth and power and more access. But we're not in that society right now. We're in a society where those with wealth and power tend to direct what's happening. And so at the moment we see that the people who are in charge of AI and AI development are primarily in the private sector. They're primarily these giant tech companies. and they're in a race. And a race is a scary thing. Competition can drive innovation. We all know that. But competition can drive some kind of nasty things as well. It can cause these companies to become reckless. They can try to push to create the most powerful product. And there's a temptation to not do all the testing and not kind of pull it back with the ethical kind of guidelines that we think should be important. But the industry at the moment, while it has that competitive tendency, it does acknowledge that there's a lot at stake, and that ultimately, particularly in liberal democratic countries like us and in the EU and the United States, the government can step in and can regulate and can take this power away from those companies if they don't act responsibly. So they are trying to incorporate enough ethics into their product development to try to push as fast as possible, but not so fast that everything collapses. Now, whether they're getting that right, I think we need to have really strong oversight to make sure that they're doing that. But there are a lot of other people who are influencing the development of AI. There are people in academia, there are technologists and AI researchers, there are also philosophers, there are ethicists who are talking about how do we do this, how do we get this right. So for example, we've developed a framework for the development of ethical AI that includes things like net benefit. We need to make sure that the harms that are produced by AI, which we probably can never eliminate completely, at least it produces so much more benefit than harms. Or something we call non-instrumentality. We need to make sure that AI doesn't treat people as just a means to an end. So we know that AI has been trained on human, art and culture and words and pictures and images and photography. Humans have done work to produce this stuff, and now AI seems to kind of be treating the products of human creativity instrumentally. It's just using it as a means to an end to generate wealth. So we think AI needs to be produced thinking of humans as ends in themselves, things that are worthy of attention. And that means with a lot of ethical things, it's not just what we should do, it's what we shouldn't do. Ethics means where do we choose not to do something. So at the moment, industry is driving this, and industry has a lot of incentive to drive really quickly and perhaps a little bit recklessly. But there are some voices, strong voices, that are trying to hold it back. Whether those voices are going to be successful, I really hope they will be, and I hope that industry will listen, because if something really catastrophic happens, then industry may face the prospect of having all that power taken away from them.
And I guess one of the recurring fears that we see in, often hypothetical or fictional representations of AI is that kind of doom-ridden future, where those voices haven't been heeded and it has overtaken in such a way that this agency has gone wrong and, humans are cast aside in whatever its ultimate goal is. It reminds me of a very silly anecdote, so bear with me. When my cat was a very tiny kitten, I taught her, or she learnt somehow to, I would go like this and she would leap from the floor like onto your chest, which is very cute when she's, hand-sized and doesn't weigh anything. And I'd forgotten about this trick until years later. I brought a friend over and she looked at them and launched herself, full-size cat, at their chest. It was like clinging there as they're bleeding. And I feel like we're on the brink of that, right? We're on the brink of having unleashed this small, kind of clumsy technology into the world. At what point does it become too late to rein it back? Like, at what point is it not in our control, do you think?
I love that analogy. It's the perfect analogy, because you can have something small and containable, and you can give it some agency. You can give it some autonomy. And then if it grows and becomes much more powerful, we may lose the opportunity to rein it in. And that is what a lot of philosophers are concerned about. Some of the more scary possibilities with AI is that if it becomes what's called like a super intelligent AI, so vastly more intelligent than we are, we don't know what it's going to do. And at that point, if we're like, we're a little bit scared of this, let's just pull the plug, it might anticipate that, and it might find a way to make sure that that plug can't be pulled. Or it might find a way to manipulate us to make us think that, no, everything's fine, and actually it's working behind the scenes to advance its own ends. So we need to make sure really early on that when we do program things into it, we are mindful of what implications it might have down the track. We need to be mindful that it could get a lot more power, and something that is benign now might be really dangerous. So at the moment, in the military, they're looking at AI as a tool to potentially identify threats and direct, weapons, and and they're arguing this could be even safer, because instead of putting humans in the line of fire, it's putting machines in the line of fire. Isn't that better? It's potentially saving lives. If it can just target 1 or 2 individuals and stop a fight happening instead of 1,000 people getting involved, isn't that a good thing? But if you design a machine to be able to make a decision to kill, and then it grows and evolves and gets a lot more power, it might be too late to pull that out. This is precisely why we need to be so careful with what we're building at the moment. And I think there's an awareness of this, and there's a big push, particularly with lethal autonomous weapons, as they call them, or killer robots, as they often call them. There is a big push to limit their rollout and limit their application. But even in the countries that adhere to those guidelines, there may be countries that don't adhere to those guidelines. And so in a way, the genie might be out of the bottle, to use that old kind of tired cliche.
Well, it's like once we've created something, it is no longer hypothetical. Like, of course we can put rules and we can hope that people will adhere to them. But once something has been created, there is always the possibility that can be used.
It exists.
That's right.
And I mean, a nuclear weapon, or the technology that allows nuclear weapons, is terrifying and existential. But it is still something that requires a human to press a button. But if we create something that can grow and evolve and make decisions for itself, that's in a way more scary, because then no longer may we be in the loop making the decisions. So this is why the stakes are really high. The stakes are really high in terms of the benefits, and the stakes are really high in terms of the dangers. What likelihood we've got for either one, we don't know, but we need to work really carefully at the moment to minimise those risks and maximise the possibility of the beneficial outcomes, which is why some AI researchers have been saying we need to slow down. There's so much we could benefit from this, but maybe we just need to take it slowly and step by step, rather than risking creating something that we then lose control of.
In terms of these kind of decisions, I think there's this perception that humans are very emotion-led, and that can be, our greatest strengths or our most hideous weakness. And this perception then that artificial intelligence and or robots or robot technology is like very cold and analytical. Of the two, given that view, which do you think is better equipped to make ethical decisions? Oh,
that's a great question, because we're getting now down to the heart of what ethics is and how it works in us particularly. And it won't surprise you to hear that philosophers disagree about the different perspectives, and there are some different perspectives. There are some philosophers who believe that ethics is really about reason. So the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, for example, said that by nature of being rational beings who can make these decisions for ourselves, we are bound to act in a particularly rational way. And if we understand what that is and we get it right, then we'll always act in an ethical way. So he says if we really understand and we act rationally, that's going to be the heart of ethics. And there are other philosophers, like the Scottish philosopher David Hume, who took the opposite point of view. He said, no, ethics, reason is just a way of figuring out how to do something well. You're rational if you've got a goal and you find the best way to achieve that goal. But reason doesn't give you the goal. He said emotion gives you the goal. He said it's our passions, our desires that guide our behaviour ultimately, and reason is just a tool that we use to get there. So he said that the heart of ethics is in our passions, and that's a strength and a weakness. Like he said, it's a weakness in the sense that sometimes our passions can carry us away. Anger, outrage, fear, envy, these emotions can cause us to do unethical things. But love, compassion, empathy, these are the things that can really guide us towards ethical behaviour. Now, if we think about how AI works, well, first of all, we don't know whether AI will ever be capable of emotion. It might be. And there's a certain point, I mean, to flip this ethical question on its head, it's conceivable that we might build one day an AI that has just as rich a conscious and emotional world as we have. And then it's not just about how can we make sure that that behaves ethically. Do we now have ethical obligations to treat it in a certain way?
Well, that is kind of my next question, is that if AI is in this grey space of being a tool but more than a tool, you know, surely we should at the very least be applying the ethics of our relationship with animals, for example, which, you know, of course are widely disputed, but there is this recognition of agency and of separateness outside of that tool function. So I think it is a really interesting question that many people put in the too hard / too woo-woo basket, but it feels like it's going to become a more and more pressing question, right?
Look, I think you're right. I think it will become more and more pressing. We don't understand how consciousness works. We don't know where our emotions come from. Oh, we know about the limbic system, and we know about the certain brain things, the amygdala and the hippocampus. We know the kind of workings that create these sensations, but we don't know what it is that makes anger feel the way it feels. We don't know why anger feels like it's a bubbling up hot liquid under pressure that's about to burst forth. And we can imagine a robot that kind of behaves in a way that looks angry, but it doesn't feel that same thing that we feel. But the trick is, I mean, we can't even look at each other and see what's going on under the surface. At some point, AI might reach this point of being an agent. And a lot of philosophers talk about, okay, one thing we need to think about with ethics is suffering. If something is capable of suffering, then it deserves ethical concern. And so this is the argument for animal welfare. Animals can suffer, and so we should be preventing that suffering. And there's no evidence that I've seen yet that AI can suffer in that way, but it could happen. And then we might need to treat it ethically as well. And that's going to complicate matters even further.
Always does. I'm particularly intrigued by the use of AI in aged care and care facilities more broadly. You know, I've seen it used in a couple of ways. So I've seen it used in care facilities, and I read something this morning that described it as robots designed to carry out mundane tasks to release humans to do what they do best, which is to serve residents. So this was in an aged care facility. However, I've also kind of seen at least theoretical propositions to have that kind of AI in the home to avoid people having to go into assisted living, for example. So, you know, if it's doing things like washing dishes or monitoring the kettle or, you know, doling out medication, that kind of thing, then that could potentially support somebody to remain in independent living, which both fills me with hope and makes me see AI as something quite warm and fuzzy in that context. But it also gives me this question of, is that creating a deeper human connection? Is that using AI as a tool to allow for a deeper human connection? Or is it palming off the work of human connection through, you know, servitude and through making time for each other? Is it kind of taking that away and making it therefore easier for us to disconnect from people who are challenging, who need more from us?
Yes, I think that's the risk. That is precisely the risk, is that when it comes to human interaction, there might be places where we can save a lot of money by using machines instead. And if saving a lot of money is our kind of societal priority, then that's probably what's going to happen. And because we live in the kind of society, and our whole economic system is based on an assumption, on a belief that there's not enough stuff to go around, so we need to figure out a really efficient way to turn resources into the stuff that we need, into goods and services. And economics is really just how can we do that as efficiently as possible. And if that's what's really guiding us, then the cheapest option that's the most effective might seem like the best option. But it neglects a lot of human factors that are probably really important. And I think aged care is a really good example because even if we don't talk about AI, we're already making mistakes in that space.
Huge
so we've
mistakes.
already fallen into a trap, a few different traps. One trap is that culturally, in most cultures throughout the world and throughout history, the older members of our families lived with us and we supported them. But we didn't support them just individually. We had a whole network of support, the whole village kind of idea. And with the kind of atomization of our social structures into these little cocoons of homes and nuclear families, and the nuclear family only ever really is 2 generations. It's just the parents and children. The grandparents don't really fit in there anymore. Grandkids don't really fit into that home anymore. We've already made a big change, which has now meant that where do the older members of our society go? Where do they find that care? And we've tried to find an economical solution to that, which is aged care facilities and in-home care, but it still has that root problem of isolation, of neglect, of just a lack of attention and resources. So in the short term, AI, I think, and robotics can alleviate some of the toil in those environments to promote greater human interaction. It can enable people to maybe live at home longer if that's what they want to do. But in the longer term, if we can get things right, and it's an if, but if we can get things right, we might be able to find a way to connect all different generations of people together in a more integrated way. And that can solve the deeper problem of aged care.
I've seen a lot of academics, yourself included, write quite extensively in different spheres on the need for greater critical thinking, greater levels of critical thinking. And in fact, Amia Srinivasan in her book, The Right to Sex, writes incredibly eloquently about the need for deeper levels of critical thinking and critical engagement with these really gritty issues. It seems to me that it's not about good or bad use of AI so much, but about thinking about our ethical interactions with the systems that we are currently building AI in the shape of. So, for example, if we build AI within a capitalist framework, then it's used, as you say, to make money, to make us more efficient, and therefore potentially the risk of that is that the time that we buy ourselves by AI doing things like, care or toil or dishes or whatever is being used to work more, to earn more money, to accrue more wealth. What do you see as some of the behaviours or actions we can take to kind of ethically resist these systems and potentially reshape our future relationship with AI or its relationship with us?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and it's going to give me a great opportunity to just tout the benefits of philosophy.
Great.
So one of the guiding questions of philosophy is, what is a good life? How should we be living? We are these unique creatures who have an ability to act on our own volition. We have our own goals and desires. We have our nature, which does influence our behavior, but we have this power to transcend our nature. So we have, and also in the world that we're living in, for all the ills of the world today, we have a tremendous amount of wealth and power, more so than many other people living in many other societies throughout history or even in the world today, where we can decide for ourselves what is a good life. That's great. It's also a huge responsibility to figure out, how am I going to live? What values am I going to follow? It used to be that you born into a society and the society would tell you, well, you're of this ethnicity, this culture, this religion, here's your worldview, here's what is a good life, and you just got to stick with it. We get to choose, but that's a huge burden for us to decide. How do we decide? Well, philosophy can give us a lot of tools. Philosophy is about self-knowledge and self-doubt, and it's about not taking things on face value. So in the society that we live in, we're born and we grow up in our homes and our local communities, and then we go to school. And all around us, there are these visions of how we should live. what a good life looks like. We've got the market, we've got advertising telling us what success looks like. And it's so easy to uncritically, unreflectively fall into that vision of what a life looks like. And if that vision has an ulterior motive, if that motive is maybe to sell us things or to create more wealth or prosperity maybe for other people, or if that is a fundamentally unequal societal framework that benefits some and discriminates against others, if we're not critical, if we're unreflective, if we don't think about what a good life is for us and everyone else, we can end up making bad decisions, living a bad life and causing harm in the world. A philosophical and a critical life is one where we do reflect on this, and we can have a vision of a future that we want to create. We can be critical of ourselves. And another thing that philosophy gives us is a kind of humility. It's like, I call it an antidote to certainty. We love certainty. We love to be certain. We love to feel like we've got the answers. But we know that if you put a bit of pressure on those answers, they're going to get a crack here and there. And at that point, do we just blindly continue with those answers with false certainty, or do we really face the facts and embrace the complexity of the world? That's the attitude of a bit of humility, a bit of, lack of certainty, but a commitment to understanding ourselves and what a good life looks like. That's the attitude we need to have to develop good AI. We can't blindly be operating and just build AI the way it is and let it kind of then maybe feed back and start giving us other visions of a good life. We need to maintain responsibility for our agency and make good decisions. And that's where I think critical thinking is essential. Critical thinking is just about how to think better. It applies to every domain of our lives. It applies to ethics, it applies to human relations, it applies to the goals that we have, how we want to achieve them, and the society that we want to live in. Our ability to question authority, find the answers, see through the people who are trying to, mislead us and deceive us and coerce us. That is a power that I think it takes practice, and everyone needs to learn how to do that.
I do have one very short question to finish on before throwing over to you. What do you think the relationship is between AI and community then?
Yeah, look, another great question. Community, I see community as one of the fundamental ingredients of a good life. Everybody wants to feel like they belong. And belonging means having people who you understand and who understand you and who don't judge you negatively. You're accepted. And community is about that fundamental connection between people that creates something greater than an individual. It gives us something to believe in that's larger than ourselves and our own kind of small concerns. The danger is that, like with a lot of other economic forces, and AI is just going to accelerate that, it can fragment communities. There's already a huge amount of loneliness and isolation, and people feel disengaged and disenfranchised. And if we just continue down that same path and develop AI to generate wealth for other people, to take jobs so people feel even more disconnected and more isolated, I think that's a real danger. Like I said before, a job is more than just a way to earn money. A job is a form of purpose. And there's something about a job where, like, a baker doesn't just sell bread to make money. A baker feeds people. And there's a meaning and a significance in that. If you take that away from people and you fragment them, or if you just create an economic world where you're just using AI by yourself in your bedroom to create as much wealth as possible, but you're not engaging with other people and it doesn't feel meaningful, we get greater fragmentation, greater isolation, greater loneliness, less human connection. Now, I don't know the answer of how to restore our sense of community, but I think it requires us to have more time and human connection. And that's where, if we get AI right, we might have that time. We might have that lack of fear and uncertainty and insecurity, and we might have less conflict and greater opportunities for us to work with each other on common projects. And we can do that without needing to make a buck by doing it. That's a great opportunity, but it requires us to rethink our whole economic system, and that's a huge task.
It's a huge task, but this is a series for young people, and if anyone's up for it, It's them.
Absolutely.
You have a question or a bit of a thought provocation for our audience to finish on.
Good old-fashioned philosophical thought experiment. All right.
Love it.
So here's my question for you. We've talked about how powerful AI could be. We've talked about the risks that AI might have. Some of them might even be existential risks. So I want you to think about this. Imagine you have a big red button in front of you, and it has a 99% chance, if you press that button, of bringing about a global utopia. Abundance for all. Wealth, security, everything's going to be fine. It's going to fix climate change. Everything's wonderful. But it's a 1% chance that it'll wipe out all life on the planet. So would you press that button? So what do you think? Would you press that button?
Yep.
That was quick.
I'm a maverick. Also, full transparency, Tim did give me a little heads up on this question earlier. But yeah, look, I reckon weighing many of the issues, a 99% chance is pretty convincing for me.
All right.
I wouldn't want to be the one to make the decision.
Well, that's interesting. So, I mean, we've got to think about, this is one of those things where suddenly we are given the responsibility of that decision.
Can we all vote?
Are we willing to take it? Well, yeah, we could make it a vote. I wonder how that vote would go. I'd really love to do that experiment sometime. But what if the odds were different? So, okay, here's a variant of that. Imagine you've got a button, utopia or doom. What if it's only 50-50? Would you press that button? What do you think?
I feel like that answer would vary wildly depending on where you're in the world right now.
Yeah,
I think,
really.
For those of us in relative positions of privilege, that feels like a lot to risk. Whereas I realise that there are many people in the world right now where 50% chance of something better would be everything. So
yeah, and that's a really, really important observation. When you've got a lot to lose, you become more conservative. And we know that. With more wealth and more power, you want to hold on to that wealth and protect that power. But on the flip side, if you've got a lot less to lose, you're much more likely to take reckless decisions and dangerous decisions that could affect others, which is a really good reason for us to make sure that our society is more equitable, to make sure that we don't put people in that situation where they might think a 50-50 chance of global annihilation is worth taking.
Yeah.
Take that away, give everybody more so that everyone has a greater stake in the combined world. But my last provocation is, what if we don't know the odds? What if we don't know if it's 99% chance, 50% chance, 10% chance of utopia or doom? Would you press that button then? And I'm going to leave that with you, because when we're building AI, the stakes might be this high. It might be utopia, it might be doom, it might be somewhere in between. But right now, we don't know. We don't know what those odds are. And so that's why the work in ethical AI is trying to change what those odds are for that button, to try to make sure that if we press that button, it's far more likely to produce a beneficial outcome and far more likely to not cause doom. That's why the ethics around AI is just so crucial today.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you all for joining us. We've given you a lot to think about. We'll see you next term.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.